In November 1983, a full-page advertisement appeared in BIT magazine offering a complete Pascal compiler for $49.95. At the time, a professional Pascal compiler from Microsoft cost several $100s and required multiple passes and a separate linker to produce a working program. The ad promised a single integrated tool that compiled in seconds, and it shipped from a two-room office above a Jaguar garage in Scotts Valley, California. The company behind it had roughly $20,000 in total capital. Within 7 years, that company would become the third largest personal computer software firm in the world, with revenues approaching $500 million, over 1,000 employees, and a 7-building headquarters campus that cost $120 million to construct. In 2009, what remained of Borland International sold to a British software firm for $75 million. The campus was auctioned off separately. The architect of its two most famous products was by then a technical fellow at Microsoft, where he had designed the programming languages that replaced the ones he created at Borland. The price that started it all, $49.95, would come to define both the genius and the tragedy of the company behind it. You are watching Tech District, where we take apart the software companies that armed a generation of programmers, down to the product and the engineer who designed it. If that is your kind of story, subscribe and hit like, because the rise here is just as strange as the fall. Filipe Khan was born on March 16, 1952, in Paris, France. His mother, Claire Moniz, was a singer, actress, and violinist who had survived Auschwitz as a member of the Women's Orchestra of Birkenau. She died in a car accident when Filipe was 15. He earned a full scholarship to ETH Zurich, the Swiss Federal Polytechnic, and completed a master's degree in mathematics at the University of Nice. He also held a master's in musicology and classical flute performance from the Zurich Conservatory, which meant that by his mid-20s, he was both a trained mathematician and a concert-level musician with no obvious career path in either field. What he did have was an obsession with microcomputers. As a student, he had written software for the Micral, a French machine recognized as one of the first microprocessor-based personal computers. He understood compilers. He understood hardware constraints, and he understood, from personal experience, that the tools programmers needed to write software were absurdly expensive for what they delivered. A professional Pascal compiler in 1983 might cost $300 to $500, and it would run slowly, require multiple passes to produce a working executable, and ship without an integrated editor. A programmer would write code in one program, save it, switch to the compiler, wait, switch to the linker, wait again, find the error, and repeat. The entire workflow was built for mainframe engineers and priced for corporate budgets. If you were a student, a hobbyist, or a solo developer working from a spare bedroom, you either paid a fortune or you wrote in BASIC and accepted the limitations. 700 miles north, in Copenhagen, a young electrical engineering student named Anders Heilsberg was reaching the same conclusion from the other direction. While studying at the Technical University of Denmark, Heilsberg had written a Pascal compiler for the NASCOM 2 microcomputer and began selling it under the name Blue Label Software Pascal. He later renamed it PolyPascal and licensed it through his own small company, PolyData. The compiler was fast, tight, and written in assembly language. It compiled Pascal programs in a single pass, holding everything in RAM, producing executables that ran circles around the interpreted alternatives most hobbyists were using. Heilsberg was not a businessman. He was an engineer who happened to have built something that worked better than anything else on the market. Khan was not an engineer. He was a businessman who understood exactly what a tool like that was worth. The two men had never met. The world they were about to enter, personal computer software in 1983, was defined by a simple problem. Professional development tools cost hundreds of dollars and ran slowly. Student tools were cheap but useless for real work. There was nothing in between. No affordable compiler that a solo programmer could buy, learn, and use to ship a commercial product. The gap was obvious. Filling it required someone willing to sell a professional tool at a hobbyist price, and an engineer capable of building one that deserved both labels. Khan arrived in the United States in 1983 with $2,000 in savings. He raised another $18,000 from other sources, giving him roughly $20,000 in total working capital to start a software company. The company already existed on paper. It had been incorporated in August 1981 by three Danish founders, Niels Jensen, Ola Henriksen, and Mogens Glad, under the original name MIT, later renamed Borland after acquiring the rights from an Irish company. But the Danish operation had produced no commercial traction in the American market. Khan changed that. He licensed Halesburg's PolyPascal compiler, wrapped it in an integrated development environment with a built-in editor, and named it Turbo Pascal. Then he needed to sell it. The office was 2 rooms above a Jaguar garage in Scotts Valley, California. The rent was $600 a month. Khan's plan was simple and desperate in equal measure. He needed a full-page advertisement in BIT magazine, the most widely read computer publication in America, and he needed it on credit because he could not afford to pay for it up front. The story everyone tells is that when BIT's advertising representatives came to verify the company's creditworthiness, Khan recruited friends to sit at desks and answer phones, staging the appearance of a busy, functioning operation. The documented record is thinner than the legend. What is confirmed beyond dispute is that the ad ran in the November 1983 issue. It offered Turbo Pascal for $49.95, and it worked. Orders came in. By the end of 1984, Borland had $10 million in sales and $1.7 million in profit. One full-page ad, one product, one price that made the entire industry notice. What Khan had proven was not just that Turbo Pascal was good. He had proven that programmers would buy a serious tool if you priced it like a book instead of a piece of industrial equipment. He applied the same formula immediately. In 1984, Borland released Sidekick, a terminate and stay resident utility that let DOS users press a hotkey and pop up a calculator, calendar, notepad, and phone directory without closing whatever program they were already running. The price was $49.95, the same number. The idea of a program living in memory alongside other programs was not new, but Sidekick executed it so cleanly that Jerry Pournelle wrote in Byte that Khan now has a product that IBM PC users won't be able to do without. He was right. Sidekick sold 400,000 copies by September 1985. It passed 1 million within 3 years. InfoWorld rated it excellent in every category and called it a time-saving, frustration-saving bargain. What made Sidekick matter beyond its sales numbers was what it proved about Borland's audience. These were not corporate IT departments placing purchase orders. These were individual programmers, students, engineers, and hobbyists spending their own money on tools that made their daily work less painful. Khan had found a customer base that the rest of the industry was ignoring. By mid-1985, Borland had 100 employees and was running at $2 million a month in revenue from a company that had not existed 2 years earlier. But growth is not the same thing as stability. In May 1987, Borland launched Turbo C, bringing its fast, cheap compiler formula to the C programming language. The company acquired ANSA Software in a $29 million stock swap to gain Paradox, a relational database, and shipped Quattro, a spreadsheet that sold over 125,000 copies in its first 9 months. Revenue for the fiscal year ending March 1987 reached $29.2 million with $4.7 million in pre-tax profits. But by the following fiscal year, profits had dropped to $1.8 million. In August 1988, Borland laid off 13% of its workforce. The direct mail model that built the company was not scaling into dealer distribution channels. Khan retooled the sales organization and the company survived, but the episode exposed a structural truth that would define everything that came after. Borland was an engineering company run by a mathematician who believed that great products sold themselves. When they did, the company grew at rates that terrified its competitors. When they did not, the overhead almost killed it. Borland could build products faster than it could build a business to sustain them. Therefore, when Khan decided to go after the spreadsheet market directly, he was not expanding from strength. He was gambling. Quattro Pro launched in September 1989 at a retail price of $725, but Borland offered it to Lotus 1 to 2 to 3 customers for $99. That was not a discount. That was a declaration of war against Lotus Development Corporation and, by extension, Microsoft Excel. By the end of 1990, Quattro Pro was shipping 50,000 copies a month and had captured roughly 20% of the spreadsheet market. Borland was no longer a compiler company or even a tools company. It was an office software company that had walked into a fight with 2 firms that had 10 and 50 times its resources. You can read that decision 2 ways. From one angle, Khan was doing what had always worked. Find an expensive product, build a cheaper version, and undercut the incumbent on price. From another angle, he was picking a fight he could win on features, but never on distribution, because Lotus and Microsoft could bundle, discount, and absorb losses that would bankrupt a company Borland's size. Honest history holds both readings at once. The aggression that made Borland different from every other small software company in Silicon Valley was about to become the thing that nearly destroyed it. In July 1990, Lotus sued. The complaint alleged that Borland had illegally copied the Lotus 1-2-3 menu command hierarchy into Quattro Pro. A Massachusetts district judge ruled against Borland in July 1992, finding that the menu structure was copyrightable and that Borland had infringed it. Borland removed the disputed compatibility feature and fought the ruling to the First Circuit Court of Appeals, which reversed the decision in 1995, holding that the Lotus menu structure was an uncopyrightable method of operation under Section 102B of the Copyright Act. Lotus appealed to the Supreme Court. In January 1996, the justices split 4-4, with Justice Stevens recused. The tie affirmed the First Circuit by default, but set no national precedent. Borland had won the lawsuit, but the lawsuit was never the real fight. While Borland litigated menu hierarchies for 6 years, Microsoft was bundling Excel into Office alongside Word and Access, packaging a spreadsheet, a word processor, and a database into a single suite sold at a price that made standalone products economically impossible. The era of the individual tool, the $49 compiler, the $99 spreadsheet, was ending. Microsoft could afford to subsidize what Borland needed to charge for because Microsoft had Windows. The platform was becoming the product, and every tool that ran on the platform was just another feature Microsoft could replicate and include for free. Borland did not have a platform. It had compilers, databases, and a spreadsheet. And one by one, Microsoft was building its own versions of all 3. But before the fall, there was a peak, and the peak was extraordinary. By March 1991, Borland's revenues had doubled over the previous 12 months, with earnings of $11.8 million. In October 1991, the company completed its acquisition of Ashton Tate Corporation for $439 million in stock, absorbing DBase, one of the most widely installed database programs in personal computing history. Combined with Paradox, Borland now controlled 65% of the PC database market and more than half of a market worth $300 million annually. Revenue reached $482.5 million. Filipe Khan had taken a company from zero revenue to a $500 million run rate without a single dollar of venture capital. By headcount revenue and market share, Borland International was the third largest personal computer software company on Earth, behind only Microsoft and Lotus. The company moved into a 7-building campus in Scotts Valley that it built from the ground up for $120 million. In the hallways of that campus, the two products that earned the devotion of an entire generation of programmers were being refined and shipped. Turbo Pascal first. Anders Heilsberg's compiler was written in assembly language, and its entire monolithic runtime was 10 kilobytes. 10 kilobytes. It compiled a program in seconds on hardware, where Microsoft Pascal required 2 separate compilation passes, plus a linking step that could take minutes on a floppy disk system. PC Magazine wrote that nothing like Turbo Pascal has ever existed for PC-DOS before. Computer Language Magazine called it the Pascal to acquire. Bill Gates reportedly asked why Microsoft's own tools were so slow compared to what Khan's company was shipping. By 1986, Borland had sold over 400,000 copies of Turbo Pascal in a market that analysts had estimated at 30,000 potential buyers. The analysts were not wrong about the size of the existing market. They were wrong about what a $49 compiler could create. Turbo Pascal did not serve a market. It built one. Students who could never have afforded a professional compiler learned to program on Turbo Pascal. Hobbyists who had been stuck in BASIC graduated to structured programming overnight. And professionals who were tired of waiting 3 minutes for a compile-link cycle switched and never went back. Then Delphi. If Turbo Pascal proved that a compiler could be fast and cheap, Delphi proved that a visual development tool could be fast, cheap, and professional at the same time. Launched on February 14, 1995, at the Software Development 95 conference in San Francisco, 6 months before Windows 95 shipped, Delphi was Heilsberg's masterwork. The internal code name referenced the Oracle at Delphi because the tool was originally designed to talk to Oracle databases. What it became was something larger. Delphi combined Object Pascal with a visual form builder that resembled Visual Basic in its drag-and-drop simplicity, but underneath, it did something Visual Basic could not do. It compiled to standalone native executables. No runtime DLL shipped to the target machine. No interpreter sitting between the code and the processor. Full access to the Windows API. The Visual Component Library gave developers reusable objects that compiled directly into the binary, and the whole system produced applications that were small, fast, and self-contained. Visual Basic was popular because it was easy. Delphi was respected because it was both easy and fast. Programmers used Delphi to build Skype. They used it to build FL Studio, the music production software found in professional recording studios around the world. They built Total Commander. They built WinRare. They built thousands of commercial applications that ran on Windows machines in every country. And many of those applications are still running today on code that has not been rewritten in 30 years. But the seed of everything that came next was already in the ground. The Ashton Tate acquisition had cost $439 million, and Borland had bought a company whose flagship product was already in decline. DBase 4 arrived late, buggy, and slow. The original DBase 2 had been written in tight assembly language, but Ashton Tate had converted DBase 3 to C using an automated translation tool that produced code the engineers themselves admitted was difficult to maintain. By 1989, Ashton Tate's database market share had fallen from 63% to 43%. In its final independent year, the company lost $40 million and laid off 400 of its 1,800 employees. Borland paid $439 million for this. Then it got worse. 5 months after the deal closed, in March 1992, Microsoft acquired Fox Software for $170 million. Microsoft took the Fox Pro technology and began building Microsoft Access, which it would bundle into Office at no additional cost. Borland had spent $439 million on a declining database. Microsoft had spent $170 million on a growing one and given the result away for free inside a suite that was already on every corporate desktop in America. The fiscal year ending in 1991 produced revenues of $464 million and a loss of $110.4 million. The next year brought another loss of $49.2 million. 350 employees were let go at the end of 1992, with a $35 million charge against earnings. A company that had been growing at a rate that stunned the industry was suddenly losing money faster than it had ever made it. The products were brilliant. The engineering was as good as anything in the industry. And the man who had built both Turbo Pascal and Delphi, the engineer whose 10 kilobyte runtime had started the entire story, was about to receive a phone call from Redmond with a number attached to it that Borland could not match. In January 1995, Borland's board of directors forced Filipe Khan to resign as CEO. The Ashton Tate acquisition had left the company reeling. The stock price had collapsed, and the board wanted a different direction. Khan took his severance and the Sidekick intellectual property, founded a company called Starfish Software, and built it into a mobile synchronization business that Motorola would acquire for $325 million in 1998. He landed on his feet. Borland did not. 20 months after Khan's departure, in October 1996, Anders Heilsberg left Borland for Microsoft. The initial offer included a signing bonus of $500,000. When Borland made a counteroffer, Microsoft doubled it to $1 million. At Microsoft, Heilsberg would design Visual J++, then become the lead architect of C++, then lead the .NET Languages group, and later create TypeScript. Every one of those tools was the direct spiritual descendant of what he had built at Borland. The object Pascal he perfected in Delphi became the template for C++. The tight IDE he championed at Borland became the model for Visual Studio. The compilation speed he had obsessed over since his PolyPascal days in Copenhagen became the design philosophy behind TypeScript's compiler. Microsoft did not just hire an engineer. It acquired the architectural mind behind everything Borland had ever shipped, and it used that mind to build the tools that would replace Borland's products entirely. The talent drain did not stop with Heilsberg. Brad Silverberg, Borland's former vice president of engineering, had already left for Microsoft in 1990, where he went on to lead the development of Internet Explorer. Paul Gross, senior vice president of research and development, left for Microsoft. Chuck Jazzowski, the chief scientist and architect of Delphi's core technology, left for Microsoft's Avalon team in January 2004. Blake Stone, the chief technology officer, followed him a month later. In May 1997, CEO Del Yocam filed a suit against Microsoft in Santa Clara County Superior Court, alleging that Microsoft had systematically hired at least 34 Borland employees over 30 months, placing them in identical roles to extract proprietary knowledge and cripple Borland's ability to compete. Microsoft's spokesperson responded that their offer letters explicitly stated they did not want or need information from previous employers. The lawsuit alleged a pattern. 34 engineers, 30 months, identical roles. Borland could match Microsoft on compiler optimization. It could match Microsoft on IDE design. It could not match Microsoft on compensation. The talent drain was not a side effect of the competition. It was the competition. The people were gone. The products were orphaned. And the company was about to try to erase its own name. In April 1998, Borland renamed itself Inprise Corporation to signal a pivot toward enterprise middleware and Corba-based application servers. The strategy was to chase corporate customers and leave the individual developer market behind. The result was immediate and devastating. Many existing customers, the programmers who had built their careers on Turbo Pascal and Delphi, assumed Borland had gone out of business. CEO Del Yocam promised revenues of $500 million within 3 years. It never came close. By January 2001, the company changed its name back to Borland Software Corporation and its NASDAQ ticker from INPR back to BOR-L, a public admission that the INPRI's experiment had failed. But the pivot to enterprise continued. Borland acquired TogetherSoft for roughly $185 million in 2002 and Segway Software for over $100 million in 2006. These were application lifecycle management tools, project planning, and testing software. They were not compilers. They were not IDEs. They were not the products that had built the company's reputation or its customer base. Borland was spending hundreds of millions of dollars to become something its founders would not have recognized. In 2006, the company announced it would divest its entire IDE division, the development tools that had created Borland in the first place, spinning them off as a unit called CodeGear. In 2008, Embarcadero Technologies purchased CodeGear for $23 million, plus $7 million in accounts receivable, $30 million. That was the price tag for Turbo Pascal, Delphi, C++ Builder, JBuilder, Interbase, and 25 years of engineering. The Scotts Valley campus that cost $120 million to build in 1993 had already been sold for $47 million in 2000. By 2013, it was auctioned online to an overseas investor. On May 6, 2009, Micro Focus International acquired what remained of Borland Software Corporation for $75 million, $1.50 per share, absorbing roughly 750 employees. In 2023, OpenText acquired Micro Focus and folded the Borland name into an application delivery management division. The name survives as a label on a product page inside a Canadian enterprise software conglomerate. Nothing else does. But the tools outlived the company that made them. Delphi is still sold by Embarcadero Technologies, now on version 13, with a free community edition available for independent developers. The free Pascal compiler and the Lazarus IDE carry the open source alternative forward, running on Windows, Linux, FreeBSD, and Mac OS, offering a development experience that is, by most accounts, remarkably close to what Borland shipped in the 1990s. Programmers who learned to code on Turbo Pascal in the 1980s still talk about it the way a mechanic talks about the first engine they rebuilt. The compilation speed, the tiny executable, the feeling of writing a program, pressing a key, and watching it run instantly on hardware that made everything else feel slow. The communities are still active. The forums still answer questions. The nostalgia is not for the company. It is for what the tools made possible, and for the proof that a small team with the right engineer could build something that a corporation 50 times its size could not improve on, only buy. And the deeper legacy is the one that hides in plain sight. Anders Heilsberg's CRs is, at its core, Object Pascal with curly braces and a garbage collector. The tight integration between language and IDE that defined Turbo Pascal in 1983 is the same philosophy behind Visual Studio today. TypeScript, which Heilsberg created at Microsoft in 2012, is now one of the most widely used programming languages on Earth. The DNA of Turbo Pascal, the one-pass compiler, the obsession with fast feedback, the belief that a developer tool should never make a programmer wait, runs through every product Heilsberg built after he left Scotts Valley. Microsoft did not just beat Borland. It absorbed Borland's best thinking, hired Borland's best people, and shipped Borland's ideas under its own name. $49.95. That was the price of Turbo Pascal when it appeared in Byte magazine in November 1983. From a two-room office above a Jaguar garage with $20,000 in total capital. It was the price that proved a compiler did not have to be expensive to be good. It was the price that built a company into the third largest PC software firm in the world. And it was, in the end, the price of a philosophy that could not survive a competitor willing to give the same tools away for free on a platform it already owned. the development tools division that carried the legacy of Turbo Pascal and Delphi sold for $30 million. The company sold for $75 million. The campus sold for less than half what it cost to build. The architect of its greatest products works at Microsoft, where the languages he designed are used by millions of programmers who have never heard the name Borland. Borland did not lose the programming war to a better compiler. It lost to a company willing to pay $1 million for the man who wrote one. If you wrote your first program in Turbo Pascal, or built an application in Delphi, or sat in a cubicle at the Scotts Valley campus and watched the best engineers walk out the door one by one, tell us about it in the comments. The version, the year, and whether the code still compiles. The people who use these tools know more about what was lost than the people who sold the company. Subscribe to join the archive. Tech District has the story of another American software empire coming next, and you will not want to miss how it ends.